The morning of April 1st, 2014 began like any other in the quiet mountain town of Bukete. Mist coiled over the hills, draping the pine forests in silver veils, while the first drops of seasonal rain whispered through the leaves. Locals rose early, farmers tending to their crops, coffee workers heading into the highlands, unaware that two young women, half a world away from home, were about to walk into the thickest part of Panama's most mysterious jungle and never return. Every year, during those first humid weeks of April, the people of Bukete say you can hear faint cries echoing through the valleys, cries that seem to float down from the ridges when night falls. They call them las chicas holandesas, the Dutch girls. To most outsiders, it's only superstition, a ghost tale told to frighten hikers who wander too far from the trail. But to those who've lived in these mountains their whole lives, the voices are real, a lingering reminder of what the forest took from them. 2 weeks earlier, on March 15, 2014, Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon had landed at Tucumán International Airport. They were inseparable friends from the Netherlands, bright, ambitious, and restless. Kris, 21, was bold and expressive, an art history student with a love for theater and performance. Lisanne, 22, was taller, quieter, analytical, a recent psychology graduate and an avid photographer. They'd spent months saving for this trip, 6 weeks in the tropical paradise of Panama, where they planned to volunteer at a local school, learn Spanish, and experience life far from the familiar streets of Amersfoort. For the first 2 weeks, everything went according to plan. They traveled through beaches and villages, sending cheerful texts home and posting smiling photos on Facebook. When they reached Bukete in late March, they were enchanted. It was everything they had imagined, a picturesque town nestled among coffee farms and cloud forests, nicknamed Little Switzerland for its mountain charm. They had arranged to begin volunteer work at a local school on March 31st. When they arrived, however, the school staff looked confused. The girls were told, quite bluntly, that they were a week early. Their program wouldn't start until April 7th. Suddenly, left with unexpected free time, they decided to make the most of it, explore the nearby Volcán Baru National Park, hike through the famous cloud forest, and maybe even reach the lookout at the Continental Divide. It sounded harmless, a simple day hike on a popular route known as the Pianista Trail. The trail begins just beyond town, winding upward through thick vegetation before opening into panoramic views. From the divide, hikers can see both oceans on a clear day, the Pacific to the south, the Caribbean to the north. Locals call the lookout Mirador, the lookout. It's breathtaking, but the jungle beyond it is no place for the unprepared. Once you cross the divide, the terrain becomes steep, wet, and disorienting. Even experienced guides avoid venturing too far without equipment. On the morning of April 1st, Kris and Lisanne ate brunch around 10 a.m. with 2 fellow Dutch travelers. They were cheerful, talking about exploring the trail that afternoon. At roughly 11 a.m., they set out, dressed in light clothing, carrying small backpacks, and accompanied by a dog named Blue, a friendly pet from their host family. Neither woman wore heavy hiking gear. They expected to be back before dusk. Lisanne's camera would later reveal the journey's timeline in haunting detail. Time-stamped photos show them smiling along the trail, stopping for selfies beside enormous ferns, posing on narrow bridges. By 1 p.m., they had reached the Mirador. The sky was clear, the view stretched for miles, jungle ridges fading into the haze of the horizon. It was perfect, and it was the last time anyone would see them alive. When Blue returned home alone that evening, his tail low and paws muddy, his owners assumed the girls had gotten delayed by rain, but the hours passed and the house stayed quiet. By morning, concern turned into alarm. Kris and Lisanne missed a meeting they had scheduled with a local guide. Their phones went unanswered. Back in the Netherlands, their families noticed something else. The texts that had arrived daily had stopped completely. On April 3rd, townspeople began searching the trail. They scoured the jungle on foot while police conducted aerial sweeps. Yet confusion soon clouded the rescue effort. Officials claimed they'd started the search that very day, but locals insisted authorities didn't actually arrive until the 6th. Coincidentally, the same day Dutch investigators and dog teams landed to help. By then, critical time had already been lost. Despite hundreds of volunteers, helicopters, and a $30,000 reward offered by the families, not a single clue appeared. After 10 days, the official search was called off. The mountains had swallowed them. Weeks turned into months, and hope faded into whispers. The story of the two missing Dutch girls became a local legend, a warning to those who underestimated the forest. Then, 10 weeks later, on June 14, 2014, a woman from the Nage indigenous community walked into the Bukete police station carrying a blue backpack. She explained that she had found it by the bank of the Culebra River near her village, Alto Romero. It hadn't been there the day before, she insisted. She believed the rising river must have brought it down overnight. Inside the bag, investigators discovered 2 pairs of sunglasses, $83 in cash, a water bottle, Lisanne's passport, her camera, 2 bras, and both women's mobile phones. Everything was neatly arranged. Everything was dry, perfectly dry. Even the electronics still worked. To anyone familiar with the rainforest's constant moisture, that detail was baffling. If the backpack had truly been in the river, it should have been soaked, the contents ruined, yet somehow it looked as though someone had placed it there deliberately. When searchers fanned out around Alto Romero, they found more. About a mile upstream lay a pair of jean shorts belonging to Kris. Accounts vary. Some claim they were folded and set atop a rock. Others claim they were found floating in the water. One of Kris's empty boots was located nearby. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, just isolated pieces of a vanished story. The discovery reignited the investigation. Dutch forensic teams flew back in, joined by Panamanian police and volunteers. Over the following weeks, searchers found scattered bone fragments across a small area of the jungle. A piece of Lisanne's pelvis, one of her boots still containing foot bones, fragments of Kris's bones, lighter and oddly clean, and chillingly, remains from 3 other unidentified individuals found in the same vicinity. These findings turned the case from a missing persons search into something much darker. How had 2 healthy young women ended up reduced to fragments in the world's densest rainforest? And who were the others? While forensic teams analyzed the remains, investigators examined the contents of the recovered phones and camera. The data would only deepen the mystery. Between April 1st and 3rd, the phones showed 7 failed attempts to call emergency services, both Panama's 112 and 911 numbers. The first was logged at 4:39 p.m., the very day they started their hike, barely 3 hours after they had reached the Mirador. That means something had gone wrong almost immediately after those final smiling photos. After April 3rd, the phones were switched on intermittently, likely to check for signal, but no further calls were made. Lisanne's phone stopped showing activity after April 5th, probably because its battery had died. On April 6th, Kris's phone was powered on again, but this time an incorrect PIN was entered. It happened again and again, 77 times between the 7th and 10th, every attempt unsuccessful. Whoever held the phone didn't know the code. Then, on April 11th, the phone was switched on one last time, remained active for a little over an hour, and was never used again. Even stranger were the contents of Lisanne's camera. More than 100 photos were recovered. The first 11 were ordinary, bright daytime shots from the trail, laughing faces, sweeping vistas. But after that, the camera fell silent for nearly a week. Then suddenly, between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. on April 8th, 90 photos were taken, all in pitch darkness. What they captured defied explanation. Most showed nothing but flashes of dense foliage, branches, and black voids between trees. Some appeared deliberate, sticks arranged in patterns, plastic bags tied to limbs, the flash reflecting off objects as if someone were trying to signal rescuers. One image appeared to be taken from the edge of a ravine, the flash illuminating a drop below. Another showed what looked like a close-up of Kris's strawberry blonde hair, tangled and matted with something dark that could have been dried blood. No faces appeared in any of them, no clear narrative, just fragments of terror in the dark. For investigators, the digital evidence painted a grim timeline. The emergency calls indicated they realized they were lost almost immediately. The phone's pattern suggested one friend may have died first, and the other tried desperately to survive. The wrong PIN entries likely meant Lisanne was using Kris's phone after Kris was gone. The night photos could have been Lisanne trying to light her way, mark her location, or scare off animals. Either way, they implied she was still alive at least a week after their disappearance. But even with this information, nothing truly made sense. From the Mirador, the town of Boquete is visible in the valley below. How could they have walked in the wrong direction? The south side of the divide slopes gently back toward civilization. The north plunges into remote wilderness. It would have been obvious which way was home, unless something forced them north. The official narrative claimed the girls had simply lost their way, yet the map of that region tells a different story. The northern slope beyond the continental divide drops sharply into uninhabited rainforest, a tangle of ravines and rivers so treacherous that even seasoned guides avoid it. Few paths exist there at all. For two tourists carrying little more than a camera and half a bottle of water, survival would have been nearly impossible. Still, when the theory of accidental death was announced, locals frowned. They'd walked that trail all their lives. They knew how clearly Boquete can be seen from the Mirador, the cluster of tin roofs gleaming in sunlight less than 3 miles away. No one turns north by mistake, one farmer muttered, not unless something scared them. Whispers spread through the town like smoke. Some spoke of wild animals, pumas or snakes, though neither explained the scattered bones. Others blamed human danger. A few nights before the disappearance, the women had reportedly spoken with a local tour guide, a man well known in Boquete. He'd offered them a private expedition over the divide, promising an overnight stay at his ranch on the far side. They declined politely. He was disappointed. Too disappointed, some said. After the girls vanished, that same guide joined the search parties and later claimed to have been among the first to locate their remains. The distance from the discovery site to his property, less than half a mile. Locals began to wonder, had he followed them up the trail that morning? Did an argument break out? Did panic drive the women deeper into the northern wilderness, straight into the jaws of the jungle? The guide's name was never released publicly, but travelers on internet forums later described uncomfortable encounters with a man matching his description, overly familiar, physically intrusive, especially towards female tourists. A few even claimed he'd insisted on leading them off the regular path. Whether these stories are true or simply molded by hindsight is impossible to know, but they added a new shadow to a case already heavy with darkness. Forensic analysts returned to the Boquete police station to re-examine everything. The Culebra River evidence room smelled faintly of mildew, the humid air thick with paperwork and suspicion. On a metal table sat the recovered backpack. Over 30 fingerprints were lifted from its surface, some belonging to police, some to villagers, many unidentifiable. No one could say how many hands had touched it before it reached authorities. And yet, despite weeks of exposure to the rainforest, the pack looked clean, almost new. Its zippers glided smoothly, the fabric unstained by mud or grease. This was more than unusual. In tropical climates, moisture seeps into everything. Leather rots, metal rusts, mold blooms overnight. But the items, passport, money, electronics, remained pristine. If the bag had indeed traveled downstream, investigators argued, it should have been waterlogged. Instead, it seemed placed intentionally, like a message left to be found. When bone fragments were tested, more questions arose. Kris's bones were unnaturally white, stripped of tissue and polished smooth, almost bleached. Lisanne's, however, still carried traces of organic material. One bone fragment even tested positive for phosphorus, a chemical sometimes associated with bleaching agents. How could two bodies exposed to the same environment decay so differently? And why were the skulls missing? Not a single tooth, jawbone, or major limb had been recovered. If animals had scavenged the remains, microscopic bite marks should have been visible. None were. If currents had scattered them, abrasion marks from rocks should have appeared. Again, none, as if parts of the bodies had simply vanished. Among the photos on Lisanne's camera, one number was conspicuously absent, image 509. It should have fallen between the final daylight photo from April 1st and the first of the 90 nighttime shots on April 8th. Yet when the digital files were examined, 509 was missing, deleted deliberately, not corrupted. Whoever erased it did so with knowledge of the camera's functions. Was it Lisanne, perhaps trying to hide something traumatic from whoever might eventually find the device? Or had another person handled the camera after their deaths? The unanswered gap only deepened the dread. Technicians enhanced the night photographs repeatedly, drawing out faint outlines, a riverbank here, a blurred hand there. In one, the flash illuminates what appears to be a rock face streaked with moisture, but beneath it, a darker shape, vaguely human. Analysts debated whether it was a trick of light or something far more disturbing. Even with modern imaging tools, no one could be certain. What remains undisputed is that those photographs were taken in near total darkness, hour after hour, by someone still alive enough to operate the camera, yet isolated from all hope of rescue. The northern wilderness of the Divide is almost impossible terrain. Steep ravines, constant rain, slippery mud that swallows boots whole. Locals say the forest there eats sound. Voices vanish, compasses spin, and daylight fades hours before sunset. In April, the rains grow heavier each day, turning paths into rivers. For anyone lost, the odds of survival plummet after 48 hours. Rescuers who entered that area during follow-up searches spoke of eerie stillness, the sense of being watched. Some described hearing faint clicks, like a camera shutter echoing through the trees. Others dismissed it as imagination, nerves frayed by long hours and the grim task of recovering human remains. But the stories persisted, feeding the legend already blooming around the Dutch girls. When the final report was released in late 2014, the Panamanian authorities concluded that the deaths were accidental. The women they claimed had taken a wrong turn beyond the Mirador, become disoriented, and succumbed to exposure. The families back in the Netherlands were heartbroken but unconvinced. Lisanne's parents publicly questioned how two intelligent and cautious women could make such a fatal mistake on a clear day. Kris's relatives wondered aloud why local law enforcement had delayed their search. Each question met the same response: the jungle is unforgiving. Yet whispers of corruption and cover-up refused to fade. Boquete's economy heavily depends on tourism. Tragedy threatens that delicate balance. A narrative of simple misadventure protected business far better than the suggestion of foul play. And so, officially, the case was closed. Unofficially, it was only beginning.
Journalists digging into archives found something chilling. In the decades surrounding the disappearance, more than 24 people, hikers, locals, tourists, had vanished in the same region of the highlands. Many were never found. A few were discovered months later, bones scattered, stories eerily similar. Statistically, the numbers made no sense for an area with so few residents. Something was happening in those mountains, something no one wanted to name. Some theorists blamed opportunistic crime, robberies gone wrong, assaults hidden by the jungle. Others suspected organized networks, trafficking organs or people across the porous border. And then there were those who whispered older tales, stories the Nyabe elders told long before tourists came, of La Sombra Verde, the green shadow, a spirit said to lure travelers off safe paths with the sound of a woman calling for help. To skeptics, it was folklore. To others, it fit the facts uncomfortably well. Back in Europe, analysts pored over the phone data trying to reconstruct the women's final days. By combining GPS coordinates, call attempts, and daylight cycles, they created a timeline of desperation. From April 1st to 3rd, both phones were used normally, calls placed, screens checked, battery life managed carefully. After the 3rd, the pattern changed. Power-on times grew shorter, like someone conserving energy. On April 6th, the second phone was accessed clumsily, wrong pin after wrong pin, as if trembling hands were pressing random digits in panic. Survival experts reading the logs concluded that at least one woman lived nearly 10 days after becoming lost. Imagine that. 10 days in a rainforest where the sun barely pierces the canopy, nights alive with insects and distant thunder, food and water dwindling, your only light the flash of a camera. Every sound amplified, every hour stretched to eternity. Whatever killed them did not come quickly. If the women perished naturally, where were the rest of their bodies? How did the backpack remain untouched? Who deleted image 509? Why were bones belonging to 3 other people found among theirs? None of these questions were addressed publicly. The case file, translated into Dutch months later, omitted certain witness statements. One local farmer, for example, claimed he'd heard female screams echoing from the northern valley 2 nights after the disappearance, the sound of 2 voices calling for help, then abruptly silenced. His statement never appeared in the final report. To the families, this omission was unforgivable. Kris's father said during a television interview, "Someone knows more. Someone in that town knows exactly what happened." But without direct evidence, suspicion alone could not reopen the investigation. Today, the Pianista Trail still draws hikers. Wooden signs mark its entrance, warning in Spanish and English, "Stay on the path, do not cross the divide without a guide." Locals rarely go beyond the Mirador anymore. They say the forest up there feels different, heavier, colder, alive in ways they can't describe. Occasionally, someone reports strange phenomena, camera batteries draining instantly, GPS devices flickering, distant whispers carried on the wind. Guides laugh these stories off for tourists, but among themselves they share a rule: never hike after dusk, and if you hear a woman calling your name from the trees, don't answer. The story of Kris and Lisanne has become both cautionary tale and ghost legend. Children in Bokete grow up hearing that their spirits wander the cloud forest, forever searching for the way home. Travelers leave small offerings, bracelets, photographs, folded notes at the start of the trail. Some swear they felt a gentle tug on their backpacks as they climb, as though unseen hands were warning them to turn back. For the families, closure remains impossible. In interviews, Lisanne's mother still speaks of her daughter in the present tense. She loved taking pictures, she says softly. Even when she was scared, she would look through the lens to make sense of the world. Perhaps that's what she was doing on April 8th, trying to document her last moments, to leave breadcrumbs of light in a darkness that refused to end. Kris's parents have become advocates for safer travel programs, urging governments to improve emergency infrastructure in remote tourist areas. They rarely discuss the darker theories. Whatever happened, her father once said, it shows how quickly paradise can change. Despite the official conclusion, the Lost Girls of Panama case continues to fascinate and disturb. Podcasts dissect the data, YouTubers trace the photos frame by frame, online communities argue endlessly over every pixel of evidence. Some insist it was pure misfortune, others see a cover-up reaching high into local politics. A few lean into the supernatural, convinced that the girls were drawn by something that still watches from the mist. What makes the case endure isn't merely the mystery, but the atmosphere surrounding it, the sense that the forest itself is complicit. Even skeptics admit there's something unsettling about those final photos, the flash reflecting off rain-slicked branches, the glimpses of rope or fabric tied between trees, the strange order amid chaos. They read like a coded message, a plea written in light. Some independent investigators proposed one last explanation. They believe the women, realizing they were lost, tried to follow the river downstream, a logical move in survival scenarios. But rivers in that region are deceptive. They lead not to villages, but to labyrinths of cliffs and waterfalls. One misstep could be fatal. Perhaps Kris fell while attempting to cross, breaking her leg or worse. Lisanne, unable to carry her, stayed for days beside her dying friend before desperation forced her to move on. The night photos, then, were her attempt to find the trail again, using the flash to illuminate her path. When her camera battery finally died, she had nothing left. No light, no food, no hope. It's a theory both tragic and plausible, yet still it doesn't explain everything. Not the pristine backpack, not the missing image, not the other bones. And so the truth remains buried, like the women themselves, beneath layers of rain-soaked earth and rumor. More than a decade later, the jungle has reclaimed nearly all physical traces of the case. The wooden bridge they once crossed rotted away, the warning signs fade under moss, but the story endures, whispered by guides, retold online, dramatized in documentaries. To travelers, it's a grim reminder that adventure carries a cost. To locals, it's a wound that never healed. At dusk, when mist drifts through the trees and the first frogs begin to sing, some say you can hear the faint click of a camera shutter. Others claim to see flashes of light deep among the trunks, too rhythmic to be lightning, too human to be coincidence. Whether those lights are tricks of weather or echoes of two souls still searching for each other, no one can say. The rainforest keeps its secrets. It has always done so. If you stand at the Mirador today, clouds swirl beneath your feet, hiding the valleys below. It's easy to imagine the moment they stood there, the thrill of discovery, the illusion of safety. Somewhere beyond that ridge, the jungle waits, patient, indifferent, eternal. Perhaps it remembers them. Perhaps it remembers us all. And when the first rains fall each April, the people of Boquete pause and listen. They swear they can still hear distant voices carried on the wind, young, foreign, frightened, calling for help from the other side of the divide. No one answers anymore. The forest already has.